Hey everyone, Tim Stoddart here, and in today's video, I'm going to explain to you why you must be an investor. There's a harsh reality in today's world that it's very, very difficult to be wealthy unless you're willing to invest your money. And the opposite is also true. If you're not investing your money, it's highly likely that you will experience financial struggles, maybe even be broke, maybe even be poor. And we don't want that. We want you to live a life of prosperity and wealth and abundance. And in order to do that, you need to invest. So in this video, I'm going to break down a couple important distinctions that will help you be a better investor and also give you a 3-step process to start investing. All right, let's get started. Before we go any further, I created an outline for this video, and I will link this document in the description of the video as well. People really enjoyed the outline in the last video, and so I think I'm going to keep doing it. The first thing you have to understand is that wealthy people don't work for their money. Poor people work for their money. Rich people own assets. One of the most important lessons I ever learned about investing, I learned from reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And the lesson was the difference between assets and liabilities. So there's a common misconception about this because if you were to look at a profit and loss sheet, an asset could be something that you own, like a car or like your house or like jewelry or something like that. But a better way to think about it is that an asset is something that puts money in your bank account. If it puts money in your bank account, it's an asset. And a liability is something that takes money out of your bank account. So, from this definition, your house is actually a liability. Your car is actually a liability. Your Rolex is actually a liability. Like it might be an investment, but it's not putting cash into your bank account. So the first thing to understand is that rich people own assets. Rich people invest into assets, which means they have revenue streams that automatically deposit money into their bank accounts. The wealthy, they do have an income sometimes. Sometimes wealthy people don't even actually have an income, but mostly they make investments and they collect assets. A really obvious and even like overly dramatized example of this is Warren Buffett. Apparently, Warren Buffett has $100,000 a year salary, which I don't know what he needs. There's got to be some reason why they do that, maybe from like a corporate structure or something. But in reality, he could have a $0 salary and he would still make billions of dollars from his stock investments. So I put a couple data points together on spreadsheets and I ran them through ChatGPT to make these graphs for me. And this is such an important thing to understand because so many people who feel financial pressure get angry about the wealth distribution in the United States. And people think like, how does this happen? Well, this is how. So the top 1% in the United States owns 33% of the wealth. So 1% of the people earn 33% of the wealth. The next 9% own 37% of the wealth. So it's almost like the top 10% of people own 70% of the wealth. Well, and the reverse correlation is that the bottom 50% of people in the United States own 3 to 4% of the wealth. This happens because of asset distribution. If you put your money into a house and the value of the house goes up over time, you can use that asset to buy another asset, which the value of that goes up over time. And so the rich keep getting richer while the poor keep getting poorer because as the value of these assets keep growing and growing, it makes it harder and harder for poor people to actually purchase these assets. So unless you break this cycle, no matter where you start out from, unless you make a conscious decision to start investing your money into assets, you're always going to be working. You're always going to be collecting a paycheck. This is going to be true 1,000 years from now in human society. It was true 1,000 years ago. Wealth distribution is always lopsided like this. And the reason is because of asset allocation. This brings us to point number 2. Rich people don't necessarily have a lot of money. So this is kind of similar to the first point I made, but it's a mindset shift, which I need you to understand. There's a difference between wealth and money. You can be rich and not be wealthy. Like you can have $1 million in the bank, and don't get me wrong, $1 million in the bank is great. Like that's a lot of money. But the reality is that it's not nearly as valuable to have a big pile of cash than it is to have ownership of assets. So if you had that $1 million and you were able to put it in down payments of two houses or maybe three businesses, or maybe you spread $500,000 of that into the stock market, that appreciation of those assets is going to make $1 million look like hardly anything. So you have to understand the difference. Wealth is ownership, rich is money. And being rich isn't actually that valuable because money can disappear in a second. But assets, as long as you have ownership of them, they genuinely always go up in value over time. Use the example of ownership in point number one and how that creates such a huge disparity in wealth distribution. Well, let's look at some numbers as to how that actually works, right? The median household income over the last 40 years has hardly changed at all. This point alone is a little bit separate. We're going to get into this, into how capitalist societies typically value capital over labor. They are capitalist societies. But for this example, I just want you to see how over time, money isn't that important. It's the appreciation of the asset. So I ran some of this through AI. It gave me some pretty interesting data points. In 1980, the median home price was $47,200. Adjusted for inflation, that's $171,000 in today's dollars. So basically, you could buy a house in 1980 for $171,000, which is just insane. In 2023, the median home price is $431,000, an increase of over 150% after adjusting for inflation. And so you would think, well, over time, house prices go up, whatever, no big deal, as long as the wage growth is comparable to the inflation of the value of the asset, everything's all good, right? Wrong. Wage growth over that same period of time has not kept up. It's not even come close to keeping up. The median household income in 1980 was $75,000 compared to $74,000 in 2023. So, there's a lot of political and social points here. I have very strong feelings about this. I'm not necessarily making this video to rant about how unfair the lack of wage growth has been over the last 40 years. The point is to drive this home. The disparity is very, very great right now. It's greater than maybe it's ever been. But even if it wasn't so great, there would still be a disparity. Markets just work this way. Assets appreciate in value over time, whereas cash typically doesn't. So if you want to get wealthy, if you want your money to grow, asymmetrically in proportion to the rest of the markets, you have to invest. You have to buy assets. There's no other way around it. This comparison that I used is specific to real estate, but this is true in many other assets that you can invest in. And we'll go through some of those examples a little bit later. Point number three on why it's so important to invest, and that is the power of compounding. So there's a super famous, it's basically cliche at this point, expression that apparently, although I don't think he actually said it, Albert Einstein said, and he said that exponential growth, that compounding is the eighth wonder of the world, just because it's so powerful. So what compounding means is that if I make an investment and I earned $1 from that investment, let's just say it's a 1% return, which is very low, but we'll just keep it easy numbers to understand. Well, now I have $101, which then gets another 1% return. And so your growth looks like this, it looks like this, and then all of a sudden it just starts growing to the point where the exponential growth skyrockets and it becomes parabolic. The most important thing that you need when it comes to investing is time. This is so important because a lot of people, especially people that come from middle class, lower class household incomes like I did, they get scared of letting go of their money. And the amount of money you invest is not nearly as important as the time that you invest in it, the amount of time in the market. So this is so important. Let's look at some data. Like I said, section number three, the power of compounding. If you make small but consistent investments over time, you will create massive wealth due to compounding. So I have two examples here. In both of these examples, a person invested $500 per month into the S&P 500. So the S&P 500 is a fund, and what it is, it's a fund with very low fees that compiles the top 500 companies in the US stock market. So it's a really, really easy way to invest. You don't have to pay management fees. There's nobody managing it. It's not a mutual fund. It's just the top 500 companies lumped together in a pool, in a fund, and you can just invest in that entire fund. So if you invest in the S&P 500, basically what you're doing is you're investing in like the aggregate of the American stock market. So if you make $500 per month, this is very, very doable for almost everybody, even if it's $100 per month. $500 per month, I think, is very doable. I think it's a reasonable number. And if you assume that the S&P 500 will continue to have a 10% annual return, which over the last like 150 years, it's basically always been about a 10% return. Sometimes it's been lower, sometimes it's been way lower, like during stock market crashes, during the Great Depression, during COVID. Sometimes it's been way higher, like some of the bull runs that we've had. We've had bull runs after COVID. If you create an average of the annualized return of the S&P 500, you can expect it to be like 8, 10, 12%. So if you start investing 500 bucks a month at the age of 18, by 65, you'll have $5.3 million. Now, if you started investing 500 bucks a month at the age of 30, you'll have $1.2 million. So even though you are investing for a total of 12 more years, your wealth tripled, more than tripled, quadrupled. I mean, like almost 5x, right? Just about 5x, in between a 4 and 5x. And so this is the difference, because this 12 years right here, this is where like the linear growth happens. This is where it doesn't feel like you're really getting anything done and you're getting any kind of return on your investment. But then 10 years go by, another 10 years go by, and then boom, all of a sudden there's parabolic growth. Whereas if you waited till 30 to start investing, it's going to take you another 10, 20 years to hit that parabolic growth. So the key to investing is time. I can't emphasize this point enough. I'll speak personally here for a bit. When I was a kid, I was always very scared of money. I grew up in like a blue collar family, and we had plenty of financial problems. But more than the problems was the lack of education I received on how money works. And I had a friend, luckily, who just grew up in a family that understood markets and understood this stuff. And I learned so much from him. And so thank God I learned what I learned when I learned it. Basically, right when I got sober is when I started getting really interested in the stock market and investing. So I had basically from age 23 to get in the market. And the last 15 years have created a lot of growth for me. But the next 15 years, it's not like it's going to be 2x the growth that I made in the first 15 years. It'll probably be triple. And then it might be triple again. There's a huge difference in the parabolic growth. So just to really please, please, like I'm begging you, if you feel like you don't have a lot of money, that's okay. Put $10 in. But every day that you waste is a day that you're not collecting future returns on. Finally, point number 4 on why you need to start investing is because when you invest your money, you play in different tax brackets and you play different games with your money. So I use the word games very intentionally here because that's really what they are. There's different rules. When you're an investor as opposed to a worker, you play by different rules. You play a different game. And wealthy people understand this, which is why even though wealthy people make more money, we pay less in taxes. So let me give you a basic idea of how it works. Thought about this a lot. And there's four main ways. There's a lot of ways, but there's four ways where if you understand these four distinctions, you can really get a grasp as to how wealthy people avoid paying the same amount of taxes. But even before we get here, you also have to understand the pay structure of working class people compared to wealthy people. So when you get your paycheck, your taxes are already taken out of that. So technically, the government gets your money before you get your money. So, in a strange way, the people that work the hardest in society are the ones that have to pay the most taxes. It's an exchange of risk. The idea being that if you're an employee, you have the least amount of risk. You didn't have to put up any money to get your job. And so therefore, since you have like a guaranteed paycheck, that paycheck is getting taxed first. And so as a worker, your tax liability is the heaviest because like you never even get to not pay taxes. Your money is taxed before you even receive it. That that rule alone kicks you out of the game. You don't have a chance to really play the games with your taxes that wealth people can. So what are those games? Well, let's take a look. The first one is capital gains tax versus income tax. This is probably the most important one. Capital gains tax basically means the money that your money made. So if I invest $100 into the stock market and I got a 25% return, well, now I have $125. So if I sold that stock and I actually took the money out, if I had $125 in my bank account, well, that money is taxed at a lower tax rate than income tax. So technically, the money that I made from the stock market I pay less taxes on than the same amount of money that an employee made on their paycheck. So the act of investing within itself means that you pay less taxes because that the returns are made on capital gains as opposed to income. And that's assuming that I even took the money out of the stock market, that I even realized those gains, which is a total different thing, which we're going to talk about soon. So the way that works is I can borrow against my assets. And this is a important and distinct yet real subtle way that rich people don't pay taxes. Here's how it works. Like I said, if I made $125 on my capital gains on the stock market, well, I don't actually pay taxes on that money until I withdraw the money out of the stock market, until I realize those gains. And so instead of realizing those gains, what wealthy people do is they just take loans out against that. So if we just said the S&P 500 is growing at about 10% a year, right? We can kind of assume that we'll get a 10% growth, but I pay no taxes on a loan at a 4% interest rate. Well, why would I bother taking the money out of the stock market when I can just let that money keep growing? I can take a loan out against it and pay no taxes on the loan and pay a smaller fee than the money that I would have to pay on capital gains. So this is probably the way that wealthy people really, really ratchet their wealth and they keep their money and their assets hidden from Uncle Sam and from the US government. Like obviously, I have to say this here in this video. I'm not telling anybody to go do this because there's obvious risks here. Let's say that you have $1 million in the stock market and then you invest in some company that has like a catastrophic loss. Well, great. You still owe that money to the bank that you took the loan on, and now you have half as much money to pay it back with, right? So you can totally go financially bankrupt by playing this game. I'm not financial advice. I'm not saying that you should do this. I don't do this. I've never borrowed money against my assets. However, if the money in your stock market account and your brokerage account is so high and the even the interest on it is greater than the interest that you would pay on borrowing against it, it makes perfect sense to just borrow against it as opposed to cashing out and realizing those gains. Up next is tax shelters. There's a lot of ways you can shelter money from taxes. Some of the easiest ways is through real estate. There's a rule, I forget what it's called, but if I have a property and I sell that property to buy like a more valuable property, then I basically don't have to pay taxes on it. And you can do that over and over and over again and just keep rationing up on the value of the real estate assets that you have. There's also different ways to create company structures that can shield your money from taxes. So as you get wealthy, you have access to tax shelters. And a tax shelter that is very common and is something that everyday people like you and I can do is just simply to create an LLC, to create a business. So if you are making your money through a business and you're not giving yourself a paycheck, well, you can play by those same rules because you can spend money on things, on expenses for your business, on a new computer, assuming that if it's an office computer, you can spend money on gas, assuming that you have to travel a lot for work. And instead of paying those expenses with money that was already taxed through a paycheck, you can write those expenses off. So the very act of having an LLC and having a business makes you in a much more advantageous tax situation. So let's look at this difference. Let's look at how net worth grows when you keep your assets in the stock market as opposed to selling your assets and getting taxed on them. So if I'm selling the stock, which is represented by this red line, so each year, the investor withdraws $500,000, pays 20% capital gains tax, and has their remaining assets grow 8% annually. Over time, their net worth decreases significantly because they lose capital to both withdrawals and taxes. So you lose your money because you took it out of the stock market, which means that that money can't grow, and you have to pay taxes on the money that you took out. So the very act of like pulling your money out of this investment makes you less wealthy. And then let's look at the opposite, the reverse correlation. Taking loans against your stocks, which is in the green line. Instead of selling, the investor borrows 500,000 per year at 4% interest while their assets continue to grow at 8%. Their net worth grows dramatically because they avoid paying capital gains taxes and they continue to let their assets compound. This visually demonstrates why the rich people borrow against their assets instead of selling them. It allows you to maintain high liquidity while keeping your investments growing, creating a massive wealth gap over time. So, once again, we can see an example on how the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And the thing that really matters here is investing in assets. So I've spent a lot of this video explaining the game, trying to teach you exactly how it works and why you have to invest and how if you don't invest, you're basically screwed. There's just no way you can be wealthy if you don't invest. Well, now I want to give you some basic principles that you can follow to start investing. Step number one, you have to generate cash. It takes money to make money. And like we said before, you don't need a lot of money to start investing. You just need to be creating some liquidity. So this could be an agency. A lot of people that follow my videos, this is the main reason why I advocate that anybody that wants to be an entrepreneur start with a service business. Start by creating an agency or some kind of business where you are essentially exchanging your time for money. Even if it's not digital, you can have a home cleaning business or a lawn care business, whatever it is. But you need a way to start creating cash. And just for the record, this could even be a job. If you're an employee and you're still generating an income, the point is to use that money to invest into things. There's plenty of people out there that don't want to be entrepreneurs, but want to grow their wealth. And so if you love your job, if you have a great job, great, keep your job, but just know that your paycheck isn't something that you can live off of for the rest of your life. You have to put that money to work, which brings me to step number two, acquire assets. Remember, assets put money in your bank account. Liabilities take money out of your bank account. So buying a house that you live in is not an asset. It's a liability. I pay money out of my own pocket every month to live in this house. Whereas my house in Nashville, somebody pays me every month to live in that house. I make a profit off the house in Nashville and I lose money from this house. Eventually we're going to turn this house into a rental as well, which will make it an asset. But it's just so important that people wrap their mind around that because just because you buy something doesn't mean it's an asset. An asset has to appreciate in growth. So this could be, I recommend everybody start just by buying the S&P 500. You could put money into energy stocks. Like you can do what I do and buy pieces of companies. I've built my entire portfolio, which you can see on timstodds.com, through the money that I've made with my marketing agency. Stodzy was my marketing agency that I recently sold, and now quantumleads.com is my new marketing agency, which I am using to follow the same principles. I'm generating cash that I'm going to then reinvest into assets. Step number three, repeat. You need time. Just because you have $10,000 and you bought an oil stock with it doesn't mean you're going to have $1 million next week. The trick is to keep investing and give it time. Let compounding do its magic. And this is true in the stock market. This is true in real estate. This is true if you buy pieces of private companies. The most important thing is patience and time. The more that you check on your investments and the more like moves you make, the more you're going to screw things up. You're going to lose money. So the trick is to put your money into assets and then just let it be. Just let it happen. Time will take care of itself. Investing is something that I'm very passionate about. It changed my life. It would have been very difficult for me to live the lifestyle that I live now if I continued with the mindset that I grew up with, which is go to work every day, work as hard as you possibly can, work hard, hard work pays off. It's not how it works. You need to appreciate in time. You need to invest in assets that grow your wealth for you. So if anybody has any questions, I'm not a professional investor. I'm not a day trader. These are all investments that I've made personally into my own wealth. I don't manage a fund. I'm not a VC. I don't have a brokerage account. I just have a simple Vanguard account. I have a Coinbase account for crypto investments. And then I have an LLC, which I use to invest in private companies, which kind of acts as my holdings company, as my personal holdings company. You don't need to be some investing guru. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to have a rich dad. You just put a little bit of money into an appreciating asset as consistently and as often as you can over a long enough timeline, and you will be wealthy. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I answer every comment. Please smash that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you on the next video. Peace.